Keeper of Shadows. 10 years of night shifts at the Mega Mall on the outskirts of Dallas blur the line between reality and the silence that settles in the empty halls after midnight. I, Jacob Reed, know every floorboard creak, every hum from the appliances in the home electronics department, every pattern the shelves cast under the dim glow of the emergency lights. I thought I was afraid of vandals or drifters who might hide among the clothing racks. Now I fear what has always been here. What lives in the light, or rather in its absence. At first it was almost nothing, just tricks of peripheral vision. In the toy department, where shelves are crammed with teddy bears with shiny eyes, the shadow of a huge dinosaur seemed to sway a second after the draft from the ventilation should have stopped. I froze, gripping my flashlight, but everything was in place. Let's chalk it up to fatigue, to 8 hours of staring at flickering surveillance monitors. But then the shadows began to lie. In the home textiles department, where towers of folded blankets and pillows created a surreal landscape, the shadows from these towers didn't fall on the floor but seemed to rest against something invisible, forming unnatural angles, as if something was standing under them, something that took up space but didn't reflect light. I turned on all the overhead lights, and they only made other corners behind the shelves blacker than the void. There, in that blackness, something stirred. Not quickly, but lazily, viscously, like thick crude oil. With each passing day, the paranoia took root. I began to notice patterns. The entity, because I could no longer think of it as just a shadow, preferred transitional spaces, doorways to storage rooms, mirrors in fitting rooms, the long corridor leading to the dark, closed-off garden center. It began to show interest in me. My own shadow, cast by my flashlight onto the polished floor, sometimes had an extra finger on its hand, or its head would turn when mine remained still. I stopped sleeping. During the day, in my apartment, I covered all the windows, but even the sliver of darkness under the bathroom door seemed unnaturally dense, unnaturally deep. One night during my rounds, I heard a whisper. It wasn't a sound in my ears. It came from the corner behind the cash registers, a place always drowning in gloom. A quiet, rustling whisper without words but full of meaning. It spoke of loneliness, of how cold it is to be forgotten in the dark, of how it was hungry, not hungry in the usual sense. It craved attention, fear, the realization that you are not alone, and that is 1,000 times worse than solitude. I started talking to it. At first I swore, yelled at it to back off, to show itself. Then I pleaded. Then I just talked about my boring life, my divorce, how I was stuck in this dump. And it listened, and it responded, not with a voice but with changes. If I complained about the cold, the shadow from the heater in the security room would stretch toward me like a warm blanket, yet it emanated the icy draft of a grave. If I recalled my fear of the bosses, the shadows from the racks of suits in the men's department would line up in a stern, threatening row, like a faceless tribunal. I realized it wasn't just a monster, it was the place. The Mega Mall after midnight is its body. The emergency lights are its pulsing veins. The shadows are its nervous system. And me, I had become its eyes, its only connection to the world that had forgotten the darkness between the shelves, and it didn't want to let me go. Yesterday, it all came to an end. I was standing in front of a huge mirror in the cosmetics department, checking if the bags under my eyes were blending into a solid purple shadow, and I saw the reflection, not right away. At first, I thought it was a flaw in the glass. Behind me, in the reflection of the empty store, stood a figure, tall, impossibly thin, like the shadow of a man stretched into infinity. It had no face, only hints of hollows where eyes should be and a bottomless blackness for a mouth. It didn't move, it just was, and I understood, looking into its knot eyes, that this was no hallucination. This was it, its true form, the form of the void that watches you. And the most terrible thing was that in this void, I recognized myself. The part of me I had fed for years with loneliness, fear, and hopelessness. It was my paranoia, materialized, having taken flesh from darkness and silence. I didn't run, I didn't scream. What was the point? It was in every shadow in my home, in every dark corner of my soul. I lowered the flashlight. The light hit the floor and my own shadow merged with the general gloom of the hall, became part of it. And at that moment, the whisper became clear. It was inside my head. "Tired?" it asked. "I am too, but you can rest. Just stop fighting, become part of the silence, part of the peace." It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, a sad, lonely, desperate invitation. Today is my last round. I didn't take a flashlight. I walk through the familiar halls and the darkness doesn't seem hostile anymore. It envelops me like an old, worn-out blanket. In the toy department, I see the shadows sway gently, greeting me. In the garden center, in complete, absolute blackness, I feel a presence. It is close. It is waiting. I sit down on the cold floor, leaning against a shelf of fertilizer. My eyes gradually adjust to the gloom and I begin to make out outlines. It is here, with me, not as a threat but as a companion, as the only being that truly understood me. I close my eyes. I am no longer the security guard of the mega mall. I am its keeper. And finally, after 10 years of struggle, I am home. The sadness that fills me is infinite and calm. It's the sadness for who I could have been, but it is also relief. The struggle is over. The silence here no longer presses down, it accepts. And in the distance at the other end of the store, the sound of a door creaking is heard. Tomorrow, a new shift will begin. A new guard will come. And one day, out of the corner of his eye, he will notice how the shadows in the toy department behave a little, strangely, and the cycle will begin anew. And I will be here, in the dark, watching, having become part of what I so feared, and in this sad, eternal silence finally finding peace.